So now what we'll do is I will get into the VoIP Hurricane Net. We'll get the presentation up here, and we will get started with that. And you'll see the agenda here again. So we have a short video on Saturn following that, the ARL update, Rick Palm's presentation on his personal account of Vidalia, and then we'll have a Q&A and panel, and then the door prizes, but only for those here live in the room. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the VoIP Hurricane Net. I am the Director of Operations for the VoIP Hurricane Net, and also talk a bit about some best practices in Skywarn for tropical systems, because just because a tropical system is not a hurricane, it can cause big problems on that local regional level to support our local weather service offices, and we should be ready to support that mission as well. So the VoIP Hurricane Net, believe it or not, has now been around for about 20 years, going back to 2004, founded by Kevin Anderson, KD5WX, and Danny Mustin, KD4RAA. And then in 2005, I became the Director of Operations for the net after serving as a net control in 2004. Our main mission is to provide all of that surface data to the National Hurricane Center, and we use the reporting criteria. It's your typical Skywarn reporting criteria: measured wind gusts 40 miles per hour or greater, tree damage, wire damage, damage to structures, rainfall, measured rainfall, river, stream, urban, and storm surge flooding. That's basically our criteria. We have the criteria posted on the VoIP Net website. We try to liaison to various net operations that are on the various digital modes, but we've taken it one step further because there's a lot of information out there. The problem is trying to gather it all. There's lots of online weather stations out there, but which ones are right under the hurricane that could provide the most valuable information? So we are trying to get folks, obviously, first and foremost, the stations in the affected area to report. But sometimes they're very busy with their local nets, their local EOCs, their shelters, their own local communications. So if we can't get to them, another way is for amateur radio operators from outside the area to pull out data from inside the affected area. And it's really important because communications can still fail, but a bigger mission for amateur radio that we must continue to execute on is that situational awareness picture for the Weather Service, the Hurricane Center, also the media, state emergency management, local emergency management, et cetera. It can be critical. And we do issue out and send out the advisories and updates. What we've tried to do with that over the years is, if anyone's noticed, right, those advisories get really long. And so what we've been trying to do is read them, but kind of condense them to the key points, eliminate all the safety hazard information. We can certainly read the full advisory on request, but we've actually tried to, it's gotten to the point where some of our nets were constantly just sending out the advisories and the warnings, and it's creating a lot of traffic that, the value add may be a little bit, better if we condense that. So that's what we've tried to do over the years. We meet on the EchoLink Star WX Talk Conference, node 7203, IRLP Reflector 9219 system. All right, we have a net management team. We do a lot of different things as a team to keep everybody up to date on what we're doing in terms of activation status. We've also will self-activate as needed for an affected area, especially when you look at some of the systems like Hurricane Otis. We were thinking maybe barely a hurricane. It turned into a Category 5. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. We are also there for other emergency management partner agencies. If they want to use the system or want to use our resources, we're available for that as well. And the network is always on and enabled, so it's there now for use, and it is an always-on system, so it's available anytime it's needed. We're trying to get as much data as we can to Julio and the Hurricane Center using that reporting criteria that we talked about. We also can be interoperability for the EOCs, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, the Weather Service. We've had FEMA regions on our network monitoring. We've had Red Cross National Headquarters on our network and monitoring. We have a system where we can send in reports to Julio, and it also has a viewer so people can see the reports that we're getting from all the different sources. We try to liaison to other nets that may be specifically separate nets for the local area and bring that information in. We talked about weather stations. We do look at social media, try to glean out the good information that is there that we can then share with all agencies, along with sharing the advisories. So all of that is part of our mission. So our activation policy, we talked through just having access to information is our activation policy. So that's what we do and try to keep active in that fashion. So our net management team functions, we are there monitoring the tropical weather outlooks, the special tropical weather outlooks and advisories. As things get close to land, we'll reach out to Julio if he hasn't reached out to us and say, when are you planning on activation, and we prepare to activate. We've had a number of systems unexpectedly intensify on us where we've had to react quickly. The latest was Otis in the Eastern Pacific, and that was a real tough one. We've had challenges getting active amateur radio operators in Mexico. This thing intensified and made landfall at 1 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. A lot against us, but we use some of these other techniques of monitoring with social media to help bring in information. We have a chat using Telegram that we use to coordinate our net control operation efforts. And our net management team, we attempt to prepare everybody for what the hurricane season is going to bring. Usually focused on the Atlantic Basin and the Gulf of Mexico, but as we see, we've been having to be a bit more active in the Eastern Pacific, especially with El Nino this past year. So looking at our technical information, so we'll get to that here in a minute. Looking at our net, we have our VoIP Hurricane Prep Net is on the first Sunday of each month, Saturday evening in North America during the non-hurricane season months, and then we go to weekly during the hurricane season months. The NET provides a forum for our technical questions. We have not done presentations here in the last few years, but we are potentially looking at getting back into that. Our prep nets are kind of like just regular nets. They can run quite a bit differently than our activations, and again, our website is voipwx.net. Our technical information, always good to have your system audio checked. One of the big problems is on EchoLink. We purposely have folks disable EchoLink conferencing because it can cause unintentional interference. So if you hear that message and you get booted off the system, you just go into the settings within EchoLink and you can disable conferencing. For EchoLink systems, we like to have folks eliminate their repeater ID, courtesy tone, and squelch tails from passing over the network, and our tech coordinator, Tony, VK3JED, along with some of us within the team, can help advise you on doing that. We also can have All-Star connect in through EchoLink, so that's another system that we can bring in, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the new technology where it allows us to bring some of the other digital modes in as well. The EchoLink PC software remains the current update was as of July 1st, 2021, so hasn't been a lot of changes here since 2021. But one thing that is new that has changed is there's now an EchoLink web app, where if you're a valid amateur radio operator, you can simply put in your call sign and password that's in as your registered user in EchoLink. You can then access EchoLink on the web, connect to WX Talk, and you're on. So this is an actual web link. It's webapp.echolink.org. It's another way to use EchoLink. Relatively new. I think it basically started late 23, early 24. So it's another update that we wanted to provide folks that is new. That might be another good way to use EchoLink if you're in the amateur radio community. The EchoLink can also be accessed via cell phone app, and there have been updates from December 13th, 2023 and January 18th, 2024. We have these new revisions that are out there, so check your EchoLink app to make sure you're running the latest version because it may have some bug fixes, et cetera, that could be helpful. One of the other things through our tech coordinator, Tony, that we've done and we've haven't quite yet gotten to the point of upgrading our system to just do it directly is getting more modes beyond All-Star and EchoLink and IRLP together. We've used Tony's system and brought it in to bring in DMR, D-Star, NXDN, P25, M17. I think there are a bunch of others that can also be added. So we can bring in a lot of the digital modes, almost all of them, with the exception of some of the DMR marked systems. So we can have one large network. Everybody wants us to be everywhere, but as Julio pointed out, we can't be everywhere either. We try to be in as many places as we can. So bringing in all these modes into one network can allow us to utilize all these different modes in one place. We had done some work with QuadNet in the late 2010s. In the 2020s, we've been working to kind of get this technology. First, we were bringing it in from Tony. What we're trying to do next, and didn't get to last year and hoping to this year, is to get all these modes actually on our system directly, because we think that will help get that many more folks involved. One of the other things we as amateur radio operators should think about is, can we reach non-amateurs? There's a lot of weather spotters that aren't amateur radio operators. We can try to lure them to become amateur radio operators, but maybe one way we can also do that is use the means of communication that are out there, such as Zello, some of the other chats and social media. Again, trying to bring in all the resources of data in one place. There's online public safety feeds, or there may be amateurs that can monitor their local police and fire, their home stations. Maybe they're folks that want to get involved, are good operators, but they can't deploy to an EOC. They can't deploy to a shelter. Well, they can help from home by giving information from their location and also from these other resources. And then we can go review it, vet it, and then post it to the Hurricane Center if it looks valid. So these are ways we can plug in that situational awareness gap that people don't have, especially in the official agencies, to be able to monitor. We can monitor that for them. Emergency management is trying to update up to the state EOC. If they're very overwhelmed, those updates are going to be delayed. This is a way we can get the information of the Hurricane Center and other agencies. And again, in New England, that is one of the number one things they view amateur radio is the situational awareness aspect. There's also a way to use Zello or EchoLink or other modes with these network radios, which you always have your PC, you have it on EchoLink, or you have your phone, and you have EchoLink, or you have Zello. It's hard to put all of this on your phone and then use it for other things. So these network radios help you splinter out those things into actual radios. I own a couple of these radios. They're relatively inexpensive. And you can have it in a handheld form or a radio. You can use it over cellular, or I just use it over Wi-Fi, and I can use my phone hotspot. But these are ways that we can kind of expand our communications a bit more to some of these other modes and also free up our computers for other things. So trying to be that virtual communication situational awareness hub is what we're trying to do, along with the interoperability, along with providing communications when all else fails. But the situational awareness mission is something that, whether the communications are up or not, is always needed. So that's a way for us to kind of get in and be there and be ready for when things fail. A lot of folks have talked about the various systems over the years. I kind of just provide a table here with the last 5 years of activity. You'll notice we were quite active in the past year with even Eastern Pacific systems. We were active for Hillary because it was a hurricane across the Baja California Peninsula, but also as a tropical storm up in Southern California, which was a fairly rare event that hadn't happened since roughly the late 1930s or 1940 timeframe. We did activate there and gave information to the Hurricane Center. We'll hit a couple of these here in the last 2 years that were really very formidable and active. Won't be going through all of them. I want to mention Fiona from last year because it was really, or excuse me, 2022, because it was really a formidable system, starting in Puerto Rico with wind gusts over 100 miles per hour, affected the Turks and Caicos Islands, affected Bermuda, etc. Extreme rainfall, over 8 inches of rain. So again, this was in 2022, but it was formidable enough to mention here. This is the Turks and Caicos Islands area here, some of the, and Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, starting in Puerto Rico. This is some of the water rescues from flooding and some of the tree damage. And then it went up into Atlantic Canada. And it had the most hurricane warning coverage in the Canadian Maritimes ever since they started issuing hurricane warnings. Now, that was fairly late. It was in the late 2000s that they started to be able to issue hurricane warnings up in Canada. And there were wind gusts here over 100 miles per hour as well. Other locations in Canada through Quebec and Green Island and Newfoundland had high wind gusts over 90 miles per hour. So this was very formidable, and this was some of the damage, both from wind damage and storm surge that we saw in Atlantic Canada, in parts of Nova Scotia. From a New England perspective, for those in the room and on the live stream there in New England, it was their kind of probably closest facsimile to the 1938 hurricane or a major hurricane that they could have. And someday that could move and be up into New England. Now, getting back to Florida, obviously 2 years ago, 2022, people remember Hurricane Ian and its major impacts in Cuba through Florida and eventually as a weaker Category 1 system in the Carolinas. But we had a lot of activity from amateurs in Florida, and some of our virtual operations were helpful. So I got a surprising message from our local weather service office in 2022 saying, from our science officer, Joe Delacarpini, saying, I'm on the virtual desk providing situational awareness to the Florida Weather Service offices. I know you do the Hurricane Net. If you have any reports from the Hurricane Net, please forward them to me, and I will make sure the offices are situationally aware of them. So for about 6 hours, we were sending in reports to the Hurricane Center and giving Joe, who was the local office person, happened to be in our office area, who was providing support for the other local offices in the area. So those reports were getting not only to the Hurricane Center, but making sure we were getting them to all the other local offices. So these reports down here, as high as 140 mile per hour wind gusts, 132 miles per hour, they were getting sent in to the Hurricane Center and also the local offices. We even had reports from Cuba from social media, and this was some of the reports and pictures from social media. We even had a picture of a weather observer in Cuba actually doing measurements during Ian. So this was some of the information that we provided to Julio and team at the Hurricane Center. And then, of course, in Florida. And we had amateur operators, some of which deployed with Red Cross, that were down in Florida that provided some of the photos here. Emily Pike is originally from New England. She's a storm chaser and now a broadcast meteorologist up in Maine, who had pictures of storm damage from her chase down there. And we had another amateur on social media providing some reports and pictures, from Cape Coral, Florida area. So this was some of the information that we were able to provide. And it went all the way into the Carolinas. And who do I hear from was one of our net participants, NP3OD Francisco in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Well, his brother lives in Georgetown, South Carolina. This was around his house, all the flooding that we sent into the Hurricane Center. This was from the Surf City, North Carolina Police Department coastal flood photo from them. This was information that we forwarded, in addition to some of these weather station reports of Category 1 hurricane strength in Morris Island, South Carolina from Ian. So these are some of the things that we were forwarding on to the Hurricane Center and other agencies during this event. So now let's talk a little bit about Idalia from last year. So it affected Florida, but was weakening at the time of landfall. Nonetheless, several 100,000 lost power, very rural area of Florida. One of the key reports we had was from an amateur radio operator in Key West who happened to know friends and amateur radio operators in the Perry, Florida area that gave us reports of some of the storm damage there. This was the roof being taken off of a home. Jim Cantori was down in Florida. We were feeding some information to him as well, and he mentioned, wow, there were no 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts with this hurricane. It really fell apart. And I said, I don't know that that's necessarily the story here. I think the story is we found one of the few holes in the United States with lack of weather station observations. Not even up in Perry. There is the airport in Perry, the ASOS up there, but this is about as big of a gap as I've ever seen in online weather stations. Nothing in this area where it made landfall. And the Hurricane Center acknowledged it as well, and I highlighted it here. The estimated peak intensity at landfall is 100 knots, but there's some uncertainty around that value given the lack of surface data and the ongoing structural evolution of Idalia at that time. So this is a case where if we had some observation and ground truth in this area, would it tell a different story, or would it give us the specific story of what was going on with the Dahlia at landfall? That's what we want to gather as an amateur radio team, whether it's direct to our amateur radio operators or extending ourselves to the non-amateur radio spotters and other resources to get that information. I can tell you that I think there were definitely some 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Here's some of the structural damage that occurred in Perry, Florida. And I know that our presenter coming up before the end of the afternoon, Rick Palm, will have a lot to say about this, but this was some of the damage, and obviously the huge tree damage, et cetera, and more structural damage. So again, gives you an idea of what was happening on the ground. We did have Hurricane Lee that became post-tropical as it approached the Cape and Islands, Maine, and the Canadian Maritimes. This was some of the isolated tree damage we had on the Cape and Islands. The key thing I want to mention with this one here, Lee wasn't as substantial in Canada as Fiona was, but they did have tens of thousands without power, which you would expect from a borderline strong tropical storm, Category 1 type of system. They had storm surge issues. But the thing I want to draw through here is we've had quite a few changes with FEMA Region 1, which has included Mike Corey, KI1U, who used to be in Josh's role as manager of preparedness and response, now as director of emergency management with Josh. He's joined FEMA Region 1, and they're already working on situational awareness, and they kind of used Lee as a test vehicle, knowing it wasn't going to be a huge problem for New England, but they kind of used it as a test vehicle to test out their communications and also, hey, send us your situational awareness information. So several of the SCCs in New England, et cetera, were sending in information not only to the Hurricane Center, but also to FEMA Region 1, which was kind of a good test vehicle to do that in a system that wasn't going to be overly unusual for New England, but a good way to test out, hey, tell us what you see out there, your situational awareness. Use the Skywarn reporting criteria as an original guide. So now we'll talk briefly about Otis, because this was one, it became a Category 5 hurricane. It was extremely rapidly intensified, as we talked about earlier. We'll show some of the damage to the hospitals and hotels and other structures, how it rapidly intensified and changed it was a rapidly changing forecast. And Mexico has always been a struggle for us with direct information. So it was, what do we do? Well, I wasn't going to let it go and not have information for the Hurricane Center. Let's use our other skills to get information to the Hurricane Center. Online weather stations, as you might expect with a Category 5 hurricane, went down very quickly. But we did have some information, including these are some of the damage here. And you can see, middle of the night. You can see here one of the Mexican civil defense resources. This was in miles per hour, basically 167 gusts to 205 miles per hour. There was also a weather station before it went offline that recorded gusts over 135 miles per hour during Otis in Acapulco, Mexico, which was hardest hit. These are more of the damage photos. This is a big high-rise hotel building. And see the windows and such spewing across the streets. Pretty devastating look of things. This was Otis in Acapulco, Mexico from last year in the Eastern Pacific. So this is some of the hospital damage. There were actually videos of them moving the patients to the hallways away from the windows of the rooms because they were afraid they were going to be injured by flying debris. This was some of what happened in Acapulco during Otis. So that gives you a little run through of things in terms of the past year. Here's what we're doing in terms of our work for the coming year, trying to get Tony's technology integrated directly to our system. We are constantly looking for net controls. So if folks are interested, we'd love to get some more folks to run our regular net and for net activations. We know the Hurricane Center communications test will be coming up. We'll have details on that in early May. Try to get to some net control training, and then just getting more folks involved in the affected area, but also trying to get folks involved outside of the affected area that maybe can help relay some of this information from some of the other sources that we mentioned. Getting that virtual communication, situational awareness support model out, because we'll have 80, 100 connections. And they're all people that I think want to help. but they don't necessarily know how. And some do, and they provide the information when they have the ability to do so. But we're trying to expand that knowledge to the folks that connect and listen in and potentially want to help. So I'm going to just spend a couple minutes talking about our best practices in Skywarn for tropical systems that are below hurricane strength. Because they're below hurricane strength doesn't mean that there isn't a mission with our local National Weather Service offices, local and state emergency management, other NGOs and partner agencies, because they can have some significant impacts. And systems up in New England that transition to post-tropical, they may be not as intense, but their impacts spread out much bigger in area. We saw that with Hurricane Sandy in 2012. We've seen that with Fiona, which was kind of in that transitioning state in the Canadian Maritimes. That is an issue that is important, and sometimes even the Hurricane Center, the Hurricane Watch, et cetera, have been on the air for those, even when they've kind of transitioned beyond a hurricane because of the intensity and size aspects. Tropical Storm Henri was a good example that affected the state of Rhode Island and to a lesser extent southeast Massachusetts. This was a strong tropical storm. You could see it tore some shingles off the roof of this art association, some of the downed trees. This was close to 80,000 were without power in Rhode Island, a much smaller number in Massachusetts, focused on the Bristol County, Massachusetts area, which actually is near where I live, and I actually could find damage fairly close to my home during Henri. So a lot of that information was forwarded to the Hurricane Center, and this was well appreciated by now retired hurricane specialist Stacy Stewart, who used a lot of the reports in the advisory. He also used a lot of the information from the local office, et cetera, and he was thanking our amateur radio community for all of the support. So these were some of the reports from our Skywarn nets feeding in through the VoIP hurricane net and then out to the Hurricane Center. The remnants of Ida. So this was obviously Ida was a huge Category 5 hurricane that affected Louisiana. We certainly didn't get that in New England, but what we did get, and it was already a very wet summer, was huge amounts of rainfall. I had 8.61 inches of rain at my house. I thought that it was wrong. I had the emergency management director of my city call me and say, the wastewater treatment plant measured 9 inches. I go, okay, well, my reading must be good then. So, and this was flooding hours after the heaviest rainfall. And we were just very lucky that we had a very short gap of about 90 minutes, or our flooding would have been off the charts, terrible, like it was in New York City and some other areas from the remnants of Ida. We also had an EF0 tornado in Dennis, a microburst in Yarmouth, so we had severe weather as well. And this was something that we had to be active for from a local regional Skywarn perspective. And then this was a major nor'easter that, quite frankly, if it was a non-tropical system at the end of the day. This actually became Wanda well after it affected New England out in the open ocean. But this was probably as close to a Category 1 hurricane as we've had in New England. We had over 500,000 without power. We had wind gusts up to 100 miles an hour. Our Cape Cod Aries group was active for almost 5 days after the storm. This was a serious one. We had boats kind of pushed off in the harbor, much like what you would see in a hurricane. This is just a small sampling of the damage that we had with trees, et cetera. And there was an article posted by the league. This was a very tough system. We had high wind warnings, not hurricane warnings, et cetera. This was a very potent system for us to deal with, even though it wasn't a hurricane. So we want folks to remember, have your home preparations complete. Make sure you have, once that's complete, don't assume the media or whatever has it covered and agencies are all set. Take advantage of performing that situational awareness mission, do Skywarn nets, get information out, and be that force multiplier to bring that information forward. And then if communications surprisingly go down maybe, because it's not a hurricane, you're just in that much more position to be able to help. These are a bunch of links of learning more about IRLP and EchoLink and our website and our social media presence, our group's I.O. list. This will be very helpful for those that want to get more interested in the net. Also, if you have technical questions, our team can help with that as well. So here's some of our contact information of some of our net management team here. Welcome to contact any of us if you want to get more involved, whether it's as a net participant or as a net control, et cetera, or during, trying to help with that situational awareness mission. We can definitely get help from folks. And then my last slide, I got a chuckle out of Josh, so this is good. So this is a photo of our last, technically 3 out of 4, but we'll say kind of the last 3 folks that have been in the ARL headquarters, Manager of Preparedness and Response, and now under Josh, Director of Emergency Management position. This is Dennis Dura, K2DCD, who is on our VoIP Hurricane Net Management team. KI1U, Mike Corey, who was our previous Manager of Preparedness and Response. He's at FEMA 1 Emergency Communications, doing a great job integrating amateur radio into the work of FEMA Region 1, including the RECWIG, et cetera. And then Josh, our current Director of Emergency Management, who you will be hearing from a little bit later after a short video on Saturn. So that's it on the VoIP Hurricane Net. We'll take questions at the end.